Okay, so welcome back. Keynote time. So we're very happy to have Dan Hamza-Goodacre join us over the next half an hour or so. He's going to be presenting on a bigger picture level. The title of his presentation is Net Zero Cooling for All. He's the non-executive director of the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, commonly known as KCEP. And he's going to tell us a little bit about KCEP, how it came about, who's behind KCEP, and why this is such an important platform for our industry globally in North America, Latin America, and beyond. And when we were thinking about this keynote, we wanted Dan to be able to kind of not just talk about what's happening in the US, but also to kind of put everything into context, because we're going through massive disruption right now in the cooling industry, and KCEP, and very much thanks to Dan, has a huge impact over the last few years in making change happen and getting everyone to focus on energy efficiency, but also what's interesting now is on refrigerants themselves, and how to really bring that level of cooling to the bigger picture, to how to make people aware of cooling and why cooling matters to solving global warming. So hope I've introduced you well enough, Dan, and then over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, the introduction was perfect, and thank you for the invitation to speak to everyone today. Thank you to Sheko and all of your colleagues for making these things happen. I know we're all trying our best in this brave new world, and thank you to everybody who's logged on to listen today. So yes, I will say a bit about the work that we do, a little bit of context before that, and then very much look forward to sharing some thoughts, ideas, and challenges with you all from how we see what's happening and what needs to happen. And then I very much look forward to some questions at the end. So let's get stuck in. I have some slides. I will share my screen. Let's see if this works. There we go. Share that. And up here. Yeah, we're all ready. Okay, we're good to go. Right. So context first then. You are all acutely aware of this working in the refrigeration industry, but more so than your average person on the street. However, awareness of the importance of cooling, whether that's space cooling, whether that's refrigeration, is rising, and it's rising because of some of the significant impacts of heat around the world, whether that's record-breaking temperatures where the majority of you all are in the United States. I'm sure you saw what happened in Death Valley only a few months ago, but it's also in the Middle East, it's also in the Far East, it's also even in Europe. So headlines are being made, and awareness is growing amongst the general population, amongst politicians, amongst other business leaders outside of the cooling sector of the importance of staying cool and tackling extreme heat. And there's a challenge that comes along with this, which is the pollution that is currently, but doesn't have to be in future, associated with the way that we keep ourselves cool. And estimates suggest that cooling contributes around 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and that's made up of both the direct and indirect emissions from the energy use that is needed for the majority of cooling. Of course, lots of cooling can also come from passive design, but very much a lot of it comes from mechanical cooling with a large energy use and associated carbon footprint, and then 20% direct emissions from the refrigerants. And this is projected to increase fairly significantly, as you will see on the right-hand side, indicated by the growth of air conditioners, expecting to triple over the next few decades. And just the energy used in air conditioners alone by 2050 is estimated to equate to the same amount of electricity use for everything in, I think it's the US, Japan, and Europe. It's quite staggering figures in terms of where the market is projected to go to, the associated energy use and refrigerant use and the associated emissions. All of this, unfortunately, is not great news. Now, I start off with the bad news. Okay, and so let's put this in perspective. In the world of carbon emissions, the largest single abatement opportunity, as identified by this particular graph, is the global phase out of coal, and a lot of moves are on the way in industry to shift to cleaner sources of power more or less everywhere. Some estimates suggest that cooling represents the second single biggest intervention in tackling the world's climate change problems. There are debates about this. It depends on baselines. It depends on what's being counted. And so you can see sort of upper and lower boundaries. I think that the take-home message is this is a massive climate change opportunity, is the way to look at it. It's a massive challenge if we don't do the right thing. Bigger than much more popular topics that people would associate with tackling climate change, such as solar PV or electric cars. And it's a problem because we can't just say, let's not use cooling. It's not really an option. The cooling is critical for the way we live our lives. It's critical for health, it's critical for productivity, it's critical for comfort, recreation, it's critical for so many purposes, keeping medicine and vaccines cool. And access to cooling actually is being exacerbated as temperatures rise. And you'll see pictures of various different parts of the world there and some of the challenges that are associated with that. And some of them have knock-on effects. The lack of refrigeration for food results in food wastage. That's unfortunate for farmers if it hits their livelihoods, but it's also often a driver of additional greenhouse gas emissions that come from food as it's wasted. So the answer is not, let's not provide cooling for everybody. So you're in an industry that is absolutely critical. Like, we need your help. The world needs your help in making sure that we have access to cooling, particularly for life and death situations, but for more generally for our prosperity. So these are the challenges. That's the bad news. Now we get on to the good news. I'll start with the good news. There is some good news. There's some good news. I start off with the Kigali Amendment. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Kigali Amendment signed at the end of 2017. All countries came together with support of businesses, NGOs and others, trying to find creative ways to tackle some of the challenges that I've just laid out, both in terms of pollution, but also ensuring that there's an opportunity to keep providing the cooling that humankind needs. And this agreement will help us, if fully implemented, will help us to bend the curve, as we say, and to bring down emissions by 0.4 of a degree Celsius, which is significant. It's massive. If we're on track for 3.1, 3.3, and we need to get somewhere close to 1.5, then 0.4 is a big deal. It can be an even bigger deal if we integrate energy efficiency and clean sources of energy into that refrigerant transition. And research suggests that we could even double the climate benefits and bring lots of development benefits for prosperity and the other things that we all use and crave as human beings. So that's the context. Where do we come in? Why do I come in? Why did Mark invite me to your conference? Why are you okay to have me here? I helped set up a program called the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program. As its name suggests, it was sort of linked to, born out of, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. At the time, a number of philanthropists and governments came together and heard messages from developing countries, which were essentially that, yes, we want to do the right thing on the refrigerant transition, but we also care about energy efficiency. And is there anything you can do to help us in that regard? And it wasn't at the time, and still only partially, is something that the Montreal Protocol is able to focus on. But governments and philanthropists were listening and said, okay, if a deal is struck on the refrigerant transition and everyone can move in the right direction, we hear you on energy efficiency and we'll try our best to help you out. So a deal was struck. Many of you were probably involved in helping make that happen, and thank you and congratulations for that. And after that momentous moment, some money very generously came from a number of foundations. Many of those are in the United States. Names you'll be familiar with, I'm sure. The Hewlett Foundation. Sorry, Mark.
$1 million is not a small amount of money.
51. Yes, they pledged 51, and the government's actually put in some money to the Fast Start Fund as well. I think there was 27 in there, and that's been programmed through the Multilateral Fund. So yeah, the likes of Hewlett, MacArthur, Bill Gates very kindly pledged some funding from his personal funds. The philanthropy realised, this matters. This is a big deal. This is a big deal for climate change. It's a big deal for people, and wanted to very much get behind it and see if we could open up this opportunity to integrate energy efficiency into the refrigerant transition and see how those two things can be complementary. And you'll all know that there are implications in terms of the efficiency of appliances and equipment, depending on the refrigerant choice. It's not completely straightforward. They don't always go exactly up together, but that's part of the task that we're all faced with, to work out the optimal combination of refrigerants and equipment, whether that's compressors and fans and motors and so forth, to get to the least amount of pollution for the best cooling outcomes, for the best bang for our buck, I think, as well, from a consumer perspective. So this money was pledged. We set up a program. We sort of pulled together a strategy. This is all in the context of the ClimateWorks Foundation, which was set up in 2008 as a platform to support collaboration for a number of the world's largest philanthropists that are giving to climate change. And since then, the ClimateWorks Foundation has given over $1 billion in grants to over 500 organizations for a variety of climate-related challenges, whether that's cooling or aviation, the power sector reform, agriculture, and so forth. So that's the background. The program specifically, we structured it to focus on sort of capacity building in institutions. That's our first of our 4 windows, as we call them. Secondly, to focus on policies, standards and programs. Thirdly, finance. And fourth, this issue of access to cooling, with an overall aim to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, help to transform markets, open up this idea of joining together more the efficiency of cooling with the refrigerant transition. And I'm sure many of you know, products often will have a label that highlights the efficiency, and maybe not one for the refrigerant, or something for the refrigerant and not one for the efficiency, or haven't historically talked to each other very well, or governments will put in place a regulation for the standards on efficiency, but actually not doing that at the same time as the regulations on F gases, or maybe there's an incentive program or a rebate program, and it hasn't been particularly joined up. And being in the industry, many of you, I'm sure, that's made it a bit more complicated. So we were hoping to help the market be transformed in a more joined up way, and to try and achieve this goal of opening up access to cooling. So there are our aims. Where did we get to? I would say, wouldn't I, because I helped set up the program, a solid contribution. Hopefully that's an okay way of saying it, but it's certainly not enough relative to the size of the challenge. We were invited in by many governments around the world to try and find the best technical assistance that we could source, whether that's engineers, or whether that's lawyers, or whether that's economists, or designers, financiers, etc. We were asked by various governments to go and bring in the experts, introduce them to the governments. They can propose the kind of work that they can do. The governments say yes, no, that's helpful. We'll do it like this. We do it like that. It's generally the way that we've worked, and to date, we've through that methodology, we've helped 22 governments to propose, adopt, or implement new cooling policies. Mostly these are minimum energy performance standards for refrigerators and air conditioners. That's been our bread and butter. And some of the policies have also been about labelling, and others around incentive programs. 5 countries have produced national cooling action plans. That's an attempt to see the bigger picture, to step back a bit and say, well, MEPs and labels are part of the solution, but also we need to be thinking, what are the cooling needs that our country has? How do we meet the needs of everybody, including some of those who don't even have access to electricity? How do we meet needs in critical conditions? How can we bring in solutions for buildings and so forth? So the National Cooling Action Plans are an attempt to look a little bit more broadly about how to deliver cooling needs. We form partnerships with around 10 financial institutions, some of those multilateral development banks, some of those regional or national development banks, also some private equity firms, private finance. We said, look, what's stopping you from lending to cleaner cooling? And they tell us these are the barriers. We need to do more homework. It costs us money. There's greater risks in these markets. How can you help defray those risks? How can you help answer these questions? We say, okay, fine. Like, again, we'll try and find some experts for you. A bit like with the governments. Let's find the experts. Come in. These experts help answer this question. Okay, we cover the costs of that, and then the businesses in return say, great, that means that can open up a pipeline of investment for us to scale up what we're doing on net zero cooling. We've also been working very closely with the UN Environment in particular, but other UN bodies, to try and create a coalition, bring together governments, subnational entities like cities, states and regions, businesses, investors, NGOs, etc., in the firm belief that a lot of us are pushing in the same direction in wanting to reduce the pollution from cooling and also meet customer needs, but actually talking about it in a different way, going about it in an uncoordinated way, not necessarily sharing the learnings that we've got. So we created a coalition opportunity through the UN Cool Coalition. That was actually selected by the United Nations Secretary General last September for the Climate Summit, where the Secretary General identified like the top 20 most promising solutions to tackle climate change. And we were very privileged to be invited into that meeting with heads of state, presidents, prime ministers, and so forth.
So wait, the Secretary General of the UN said 20 most promising technologies.
Initiatives. So like the Cool Coalition was the initiative.
Okay.
That was,
and cooling, well, the Cool Coalition initiative was, and the fact that it's focused on cooling was one of those initiatives. So having cooling recognized by the number one at the UN is pretty big deal. Well done.
Yeah,
that's a lot of hard work, right?
It was, yeah. There's a lot of choreography that goes into these kind of meetings, but yes, we were very pleased to have been invited there, and you know, prime ministers and presidents and various others came together to talk about what they could do to move the ball forward, and we were there. So cooling's on the map, which is great. The next one there, industrial conversions. That's where we actually look to see. Can we merge some of our money with some of the MLF funds for the refrigerant transition? So we said to the MLF, like, who are you providing support to transition on the refrigerant side? And would it be helpful if we provided some technical assistance so that they can improve efficiency at the same time? So we found some good partnerships with the likes of Walton in Bangladesh. They produce the largest amount of refrigerators in that country. Mabe, actually, I see that this conference for the first time is reaching out to a Latin American audience. You'll all be very familiar with Mabe. We work with Mabe also to help them on their efficiency side while they're progressing on the refrigerant side, and various others in the manufacturing sector. That's been really interesting work. And then finally, we also worked with the ozone officers and the ozone secretariat to help to integrate a better understanding of efficiency into the training that all of the ozone officers get, so we can understand, okay, how do we try and ride these two horses at the same time, the refrigerant transition and the energy efficiency transition. So that's what we've been up to. As I said, it's not enough. So, you know, where do we need to get to? We think we need to get to net zero cooling for all. What is that? Why? Where does that matter? Essentially, net zero is what's needed to stabilize the climate. Emissions are still rising despite the bumpy road that we've been experiencing this year. They have dropped in many parts of the world, but they're also bouncing back in some cases more than they were before. So the task has not gone away despite this short-term crisis that we're all facing. So net zero means reducing emissions as much as possible. Where that's not possible, it means removing any remaining emissions. Popped a little graph in here for you to see the axes with greenhouse gas emissions and time going through to 2100, straining my eyesight, and I've got my glasses on anyway. It goes through to 2100, and the top is business as usual. We've got emissions coming down using conventional mitigation techniques, whether that's efficiency or solar, the other interventions on that graph that I showed you before. But that doesn't get us to zero. That's the problem. And so we need technologies that can actually remove carbon and other gases from the system. So that's the netting part. Now, this concept of net zero is gaining traction. Over 80 countries have signed net zero commitments. Either they're in law or they're policies, or they're about to become law. And there are over 2,000 businesses, investors, states, cities and regions that have pledged net zero as part of the Race to Zero, which is a campaign that's been launched by the UNFCCC and the high-level climate champion for the UNFCCC. And these 2,000 businesses, investors, states and regions, etc., cover about 50% of global GDP. So it's not insignificant that they have made these commitments. These are non-governmental commitments, right? That cover 50% of GDP. It's pretty significant. Many of those are cooling consumers. Many of those are buying the equipment and the appliances that you're helping to get out there on the market. Very few are on the manufacturing side, and we're still trying to decipher the nature of some of the pledges that are made. There's a fair bit of accounting that goes on behind greenhouse gas emissions. You know, it can be carbon neutral, can be net zero, etc. Nonetheless, it looks like Schneider Electric, Electrolux and Danfoss are making the most ambitious commitments in terms of alignment with what net zero actually requires. Natural refrigerants, they are absolutely a key role here. I mean, historically and currently, natural refrigerants, one would say, have a head start on synthetic refrigerants for sure. But still, there is no path to zero in a refrigerant as usual scenario. So this is the challenge we're grappling with. This is the challenge I throw out to all of you. You know, even more climate-friendly solutions are needed if we are to reduce this netting. Look at this graph on the left-hand side, the blue and the green at the bottom. And the problem is that everybody wants a free pass. There's always a reason why you can't quite do it. So the agriculture industry, of course, we can't get rid of cows. No, of course we couldn't do that, you know, or sheep. And the aviation industry, we can't quite make it. Or the shipping industry, we can't quite make it. Or cement or steel. You know, everybody has an excuse, right, why they can't quite do it. And we're all just going to have to try a bit harder, unless we are going to live with a world where the climate faces destabilization, or we have to put our hopes in even more of these carbon removal technologies, which as of yet are not proven to be commercially viable, and that could be incredibly expensive if we go down that pathway. So that's the challenge. Can the cooling sector get to zero? That's what we've been looking at more recently. I should say that, so I have two hats. I'm the non-executive director now of the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme that I helped to set up. I'm also the cooling sector lead for the Climate Champions team, which is the team that's been assembled to support the climate negotiations, which will now happen next year, with a focus on what businesses, investors, cities, states and regions can do. And that team has been tasked with developing pathways to zero for all sectors, whether that's cooling or energy or land use or electric vehicles, etc., etc. So who wants to know what? Certainly philanthropy, my sponsors, they want to know how to get to zero. They want to know how they can continue providing support for technical assistance and other interventions that can get us there, how they can help, or what needs to be done. Governments, many of them have made these commitments already. I wouldn't say that all governments know exactly how to get to zero. So they want to know, okay, what's the role that cooling can play? What's the contribution that cooling can make? Or how much of a problem is cooling? Is it gonna mean we're not going to get to zero? And if so, by how much? And what does that all add up to when they look across the other pathways? So many governments who've made the pledge want to know, and many governments who are on the verge of making the pledge want to know. And knowing more will hopefully help them be more confident to make that decision, right? Investors, increasingly investors are making pledges to eliminate climate risks from their portfolio. They're looking for climate-friendly opportunities. I've been asked so many times by investors, what's a good cooling product? Where do I put my money? What's good, what's bad? What goes on my don't do list? And actually, we haven't been very good at that. Actually, we're working with Mark and the team to try and get answers to that. And I know others are as well in terms of procurement lists, but investors are making pledges to net zero and they want to know where to put their money. And then the customers, right? So many businesses have also made these commitments and they want to know what to buy and what to sell in a net zero world. So we have been developing this pathway. I look forward to sharing it with anybody who wants to see it very soon. That's my final slide in a second. But just the headlines for you about really trying to boil down in simplistic terms so that the outside world gets this. Okay, all of you get this. Everyone is in our lovely community, right? We all get this. But when you start saying to somebody outside, okay, what needs to happen? You just like three things, okay, to keep it short. Three things. We think that we can get to zero through passive cooling techniques, and that's mostly in buildings, but also actually in the world of food, whether that's coatings or whether that's solar drying. You know, there's methods for preserving food that we've lumped in passive cooling. Super efficient appliances and equipment, of course. We need to drive for efficiency, so we reduce the burden on the amount of energy that needs to be decarbonized. There's a lot. And actually The Economist, I'm working with The Economist right now, coming out with a study in a couple of weeks. They've quantified for the first time the contribution in dollar terms of how much cheaper it will be to optimize cooling equipment in reducing the cost of supply side build out, right? Because if everything isn't that efficient, you need more power stations, whether they're green or whether they're brown, that's more money, and it's cheaper to go down the demand side management route. So for the first time, we've quantified that, and we're putting a time period on it in terms of how earlier that means the world can get to net zero or not. So happy to share that again, a couple of weeks that will come out. And then the third recommendation, which speaks very much to all of you, the audience, ultra low global warming potential refrigerants. Now, herein lies a big debate. I don't know whether I have time for that today. Okay, smaller than 5, right? There's a question mark there on purpose. I've had different numbers thrown at me. I can't sit here and say definitively I know this is the right number, but it's got to be bloody ambitious, right? The rest of the world is talking about how to get rid of anything with a global warming potential of 1. And here we are debating whether it's 5, 10, 20 or 100. Okay? And there's an argument there because the dose makes the poison. And when you do the maths and you work out if everything was less than 5, times that by the actual dosage, what does that actually amount to in terms of emissions? And it's pretty low, right? It's in the realms of what could be netted off. But as I said, everybody wants an excuse, right? So I very much look forward to the help of all of you experts, because I'm not the refrigerant expert, on what the right number might be. This is the stretch target. This is in a world where we've achieved net zero cooling for in 2050. Can we make this a reality? So last slide, and then hopefully I have time for questions. What happens next? This race to zero is on. Over 2,000 organizations already signed up. That is happening and will carry on and needs to get bigger. The pathway to net zero cooling that I talked about will be launched for London Climate Action Week this November, 14th to 20th. And then we will carry on consulting, because we'd love to get feedback, try and make it as good as it can be, at least for this first version. This is not the last word. Every year we should be learning and improving, and this pathway should get better. So something will happen again at the end of next year and next year, right? Then COP26, the conference, international climate negotiations that were delayed this November, still scheduled to happen next November. The idea here is that countries come along with improved commitments. They're called nationally determined contributions for their climate ambition, but also recently announced this December, the UN Secretary General and Boris Johnson will host a climate summit to try and encourage some countries to put commitments on the table right now, because we can't really even afford to wait, and maybe by next November or December, commitments can be even stronger. And then my final word is that the Kigali Amendment, well done everybody who's involved with that. It's necessary but not sufficient. It needs adjusting so it can align with the pathway to zero. It needs adjusting so we can help secure net zero cooling for all. That's it for me. Thank you all thank you for inviting me once again. Thank you, and thank you for all your efforts. Whatever part of the refrigerant world you're in, thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Dan. I see that we're Dan, I think we've been logged off. We ran out of time.
No, Mark, you're still there. You can.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It does feel a bit like it might just be you and me.
You're still there.
A new tool. So, okay, please, Franco, don't cut us off, please.
No.
All right.
Just, as a recommendation to the attendees, just turn off auto follow if you're in the live section. Otherwise, it'll take you to the next session automatically with the time. So go ahead, ask your question.
All right. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Franco. That's our colleague managing the back end of this, and the name familiar to many of you who are participating in this event. So yeah, we're over time, but we'll take a few minutes because this is such an important presentation. So this net zero world vision basically means that the Montreal Protocol Kigali Amendment is already kind of out of date, basically, right?
It does.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to go a lot further than Kigali. So, some countries still haven't ratified the Kigali Amendment, and it already isn't good enough.
Correct. Yeah. So if you're a country that's ratified Kigali and you've put a commitment to net zero emissions in legislation, then your commitment to Kigali is not commensurate with your legislative position now.
Yeah.
And there are 80 countries that have done that.
Okay. So there's a long way to go still then. Secondly, there were some questions and now they have disappeared. Oh dear. I'm
happy to provide answers offline as well, actually, for anybody who's put something in a chat box.
Yeah, no.
Mark, you want me to read some of them to you?
Yeah, no, that's I love this informal part. Franco, could you read out the 3 questions?
Yeah, so we have one by Richard Fennelly. He's saying, could you say something about the impact of routine preventative maintenance as an energy efficiency task, which the Carbon Trust estimated at 20% energy savings emissions reduction.
Yeah, great question. And hi, Richard. Nice to connect. I would say, a very overlooked area, an area which is quite hard to get at across all sectors, but easier in some. So, most people don't go behind their fridge and clean the coil. Let's be honest. And also the costs of doing that and the benefits don't stack up very well. But at an industrial level or commercial level, they do. And in many countries, depending on the climatic conditions, there are even greater reasons for doing that. Saudi Arabia, for example, sand getting into cooling technology. And some governments have therefore required auditing of cooling technology or installations that use over a certain amount of energy to make sure that it's being maintained and optimized. I think that's one potential way of getting at this problem. And another is cooling as a service, which I see is on the agenda. Well done, Mark and co. The servitization of cooling, where customers pay for the cooling outcome and the asset doesn't have to be purchased by the customer, can get over some of that CapEx hurdle and push costs into OpEx, but at the same time baking in a maintenance contract into the leasing of the technology. And then someone actually cares, right? Somebody cares because it's contractual, and then that cleaning can happen. So there's a couple of angles there, Richard, and yeah, well done. Keep fighting that good fight.
Franco, there was another couple of questions and then we'll cut it then, okay? So
yeah.
The other ones were slightly...
They were shorter, yeah. How can a business make sure that they are counted if they have net zero targets? And then the other one is, which 5 countries formulated national cooling plans?
Oh, okay, right. So go on, Google Race to Zero. When you Google Race to Zero, you'll see a list of affiliated organizations, and a business can join one of those affiliated organizations with the pledge that it's made. So you'll find that through Google. The countries with national cooling plans: China, Rwanda, Lebanon, India. Who's the other one?
Oh,
Kenya, maybe.
It's always easy to get 3, but 5 is tough.
There you go. Sorry, I did my best.
But you got 2 big ones there already. India and
China and India. Yeah, huge.
We'll find out, and we'll put that in the response to the questions in the session, okay? And feel free to add any additional comments, Dan, in your session, in your keynote session. There will be there's some other questions and comments, and you can answer those directly, okay?
Cool. Yeah. Will
All right. So thank you again, Dan.
Yeah.
And enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you for keynoting this conference.